Hello, everybody. Welcome to the County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. We are privileged today to have a conversation with the person who spent the last part of the Trump administration as the acting administrator for the Bureau of Land Management, William Perry Pendley, who is also an alum of the show from several years ago and very active in the issues of public land and administration in the West. Perry, thank you so much for taking time to join us.
Oh, you bet, Chad. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yep. You are one of the most interesting characters that has spent time in and out of Washington. One, you haven't been there long enough to be tainted by it. But two, the most friendly two administrations of the last 100 years to the West, you had a chance to serve in some capacity within the Department of Interior. You started working for James Watt in the Reagan administration, and then you've come full circle and spent time in the Trump administration. So I have been curious, and I would really like to start this conversation with a comparison and a contrast between the two administrations and what they were trying to accomplish.
You bet. Well, the thing about Reagan, Reagan was a Westerner, obviously from Illinois, but soon in California, Hollywood, everybody knows his story, a Union guy, and then the governor, and a great governor of California. And we Mountain Westerners don't really think about California as a public land state, but half of California is owned by the United States government. A third of the country is owned by the United States government. California shares that burden along with we Mountain States people. And Reagan had to deal with them. He had to deal with the Forest Service. He had to deal with the Defense Department, the Bureau of Land Management. And so he was well acquainted with dealing with the federal government. And in fact, when he ran for governor, after he was governor, and he was thinking about running for president, he had an offer from Walter Cronkite to be on the Walter Cronkite show, maybe once a week, and debate some commie. And he turned it down. He said, I think people get tired of seeing me on television, but I do radio. So he did a radio show. And what most people don't realize is Reagan wrote most of his own scripts. Mm-hmm. And they're published in a couple of books, fascinating. And it just, you read it and it says, wow, did this guy work in Washington? Because he really knew his details. He understood stuff. So when he became president, he understood the Sagebrush Rebellion. And he gave a speech up in Boise in 1980 during the campaign. He says, if there's a Sagebrush Rebellion, count me in. I'm a Sagebrush rebel.
You wrote a book about that.
Yeah, I wrote a book about it, the definitive book, Sagebrush Rebel, mm-hmm. Reagan's battle with environmental extremists and why it matters today. And most people didn't hear about that, but we Westerners did. And when the day he was to be sworn in, he was sitting there at the Blair House, and there was a meeting of the Sagebrush Rebels here in Salt Lake City. And he sent a telegram to the leader and said, essentially, there's a new sheriff in town, about how he's going to change things in Washington regarding the West. And he really did that. And I was privileged to be there. I was with Jim Watt, Bill Clark, Don Odell, the people who ran the department for the president. The president was laser focused on what he wanted to accomplish at the department. So he hired Watt to get it done because he knew what Watt would do. And then to make sure that Watt's legacy continued, he appointed his best friend in Washington, Bill Clark, Judge Clark, to continue. And then when Clark left town, he brought Don Odell, who had been Jim's number 2, in to take over. So he got it accomplished, and it was to be a good neighbor to the West, to recognize that Westerners love the land, want to recreate on the land, but at the same time, we need jobs. And when you get counties with 50, 60, 70, 80, 90% of the county owned by the United States government, the jobs are going to have to come from that. It's going to be logging or mining or recreation, or it's going to be grazing, or it's going to be energy development, whatever it is. It's going to have to happen, and the federal government's going to have to make it happen. And Reagan was committed to that. He was the first one to talk about energy independence. You remember Jimmy Carter said, essentially, we're dead, we're toast. By 1990, we'll run out of natural gas, and we're living today at a time of natural gas glut. But Jimmy Carter thought that our best days were behind us. Reagan didn't. You fast forward several decades, and along comes Donald Trump. And I got to tell you, when I saw Donald Trump come down that golden escalator, I just thought, this guy's from Queens. What the heck does he know about the West? For him, the West is Manhattan. So sort of that old Steinberg cartoon from the New Yorker decades ago. But he really got it. And he came in, he did three things in quick succession that really helped the West. Number one, he ordered a review of those national monuments that Clinton and Obama had decreed, including especially here in Utah. The second thing that he did was he named Judge Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. Now bear in mind, previously the Supreme Court had essentially been a bicoastal Supreme Court. It had several justices, 7 justices from the East Coast, New York and New Jersey, Pinpoint, Georgia, where Judge Clarence Thomas was from, and then 2 justices from California, nobody in between. And so to pick Gorsuch, who was the son of the late Anne Burford Gorsuch, who was the first female administrator for the EPA under Reagan, a guy who was born in Colorado, knew the West, knows mining law, knows grazing, knows our issues, on the Supreme Court. That was a huge accomplishment. And the third thing he did, and then I urged him to do this in an op-ed on Fox, that was to pardon the Hammonds. Now, we Mountain Westerners, we really know who the Hammonds are. And they're essentially a couple of ranchers, father, son, in Oregon, who had set a fire to prevent a fire on the BLM land from coming onto their land. And that fire got out of control as these fires, we set these backfires all the time. Federal government, state government, local government does it all the time. And they get out of control. And they created what's called a trespass. We understand the trespass. And they created a trespass onto federal lands, so the federal government brought a lawsuit against them, not for trespass, but for terrorism. And sent him to jail for 5 years, and Trump pardoned him. God bless him.
And so this is a point where I would like to take a little bit of a diversion, because we talked about this just previously on our show. Here are these ranchers, the Hammonds, they're basically charged as being eco-terrorists, and yet we currently have a nominee to fill a position that you acted in instead of when you were at the BLM, and she actually has a genuine association with an eco-terrorist group.
She doesn't have an association with it. She is an unrepentant eco-terrorist. I mean, you can't put any better gloss on it. And she's lied about it for 32 years. The bottom line is, as a graduate student, 23-year-old graduate student at the University of Montana in Missoula, she fell in with, like a Marty Robbins song, fell in with an outlaw band. And their names were known quite well, Earth First. And she was a ringleader of it. She was an editor of their newsletter that talked about monkey wrenching, how you go out and spike trees, how you go out and sabotage a truck so it'll, you have a big logging truck coming down a windy road and it'll blow out its brakes and go over the side. So she was part of that, and she conspired with a guy she eventually helped send to prison to spike some trees at a timber sale in Idaho.
So she just didn't write the letter of warning for them?
No, she never did write the letter, but I mean, the fantasy she told was, geez, I was walking across the campus one day, walking across the quad, and some hairy, crazy guy came up to me and said, send this letter, to the Forest Service. No, she was a roommate with him. They were boyfriend, girlfriend. And he says, in a statement more recently, he said, heck, she'd known about this for weeks. She had known about this all the way back in, I calculated to be February, that she'd known about it. The letter was sent in April. And he said, did she drive spikes? Did she know every detail? No, but she knew we were going to go do it, and she had agreed to mail the letter. And so he hands her the letter, and she says this on the record, my fingerprints were all over it, and I didn't want it coming off my computer. She went over to the library that the Unabomber used, by the way, just coincidentally, went over to that library, typed the letter up, and unfortunately she had said, I'll mail it from, I'm going to go down to Billings, I'll mail it from Billings. And she mailed it instead from Missoula. And the Forest Service heads exploded when they saw that letter. They did an investigation. They raided her house. They subpoenaed everybody in the house. We want fingerprints, we want hair samples, we want writing samples. She said, no, I'm not going to do that. So they said, okay, girl, you're going to go to jail. And so, okay, she reluctantly provided those. The special agent with the U.S. Forest Service who was in charge of the investigation said she stonewalled him, lied to him, she lied to the assistant U.S. attorney, she lied to grand jury.
How is it that we have not heard anything about this? I mean,
you mean for 32 years or what?
Well, I mean, in this whole process of confirmation, it's not a point of conversation. I mean, you've heard in the subcommittee some. I've never heard it explained exactly that clearly.
Well, clearly the Democrats want to hide it, and I don't care for either one of these gentlemen and their politics, but I don't think the governor knew, and I don't think Senator Schuster knew exactly what she did, because she's lied about it so effectively. Because what happened in 1989 when she stonewalled the U.S. attorney, the grand jury, and the special agent with the U.S. Forest Service, and said, well, I don't know anything. At the end of that year, they said, we don't know who did it. 3 years later, Blount, B-L-O-U-N-T, the John P. Blount, the guy who did it, his girlfriend, he was about to get out of jail on another charge. She said, oh, I don't want him out of jail. So she goes to the feds and she says, he's the one that spiked the trees. And oh, by the way, Tracy Stone Manning, she sent the letter. So she can corroborate what I just told you. And so they called in Tracy Stone Manning. She lawyers up. She's a target of the investigation. She lawyers up, gets a deal, immunity deal to testify. She testifies against him. He goes off to jail for 17 months. And then she lies about it and said, oh, I did the right thing. I told everybody. No, the right thing would be to report it to the United States government, report it to the FBI, report it to the Forest Service, report it to the U.S. Attorney in Idaho. She never did it.
Are you worried about her succeeding and being appointed?
Well, yeah, the Democrats, the Republicans, God bless them, they said this is a bridge too far. We have never had someone, to my knowledge, and I've been watching this for decades, we've never had, to my knowledge, someone who was a subject of a federal investigation and but for the grace of God would have been indicted and gone to jail for this, nominated to a sub-cabinet position. So, but the Democrats, they're all falling in line. Whatever Mr. Biden wants, we'll do it. You know, they're so far, they're looking the other way. Here's why I'm worried. Number one, she lied to a special agent. The Bureau of Land Management has 76 special agents and 212 law enforcement rangers. She's going to be their boss. Can you imagine that? Law enforcement officers for the Bureau of Land Management knowing that their boss lied to one of them, somebody like them, And these guys are sworn to go out and, they're managing 1 million acres of land. Second thing, she managed 65 million acres of timberland, but she's against timber harvesting. She's against grazing. Earth First said cattle free by 1993, get rid of all the cattle grazing. She's against cattle grazing. We have 155 million acres of our 245 million acres of the Bureau of Land Management that's grazing, like here in Utah. And then last September, during the height of the fires in 2020, she sent out a tweet saying, hey, this thing about the fire, everybody ought to look at my husband's article from several years ago. And so you look at the article and say, well, what does this article say? And the article says, many people are building their homes in what we call the wildland urban interface, WUI, and those homes are not built to code, so we should let those homes burn down. Really? Tracy Stone Manning's running 3,000 firefighters, and she believes some of our homes should burn down because we didn't do it right. So she's not qualified for the job. The president should withdraw her nomination, and I'm hopeful that as the president's numbers crater, these Democrats are going to be looking for cover, and they're going to do the right thing and say we should not have someone of this caliber running the Bureau of Land Management.
So when we previously did a show on this, I asked the guests on the show the very question, what do people need to do? I mean, we've got very little time left, and maybe by the time this airs, the decision's already made. But what do people need to do? I mean, you know, the western states and they've got Republicans in there, they're already set. What do people need to do?
Well, what they need to do is contact their senators, especially Democrat senators. The Republicans are all united on this, and my congratulations to my friend, Senator John Barrasso, Dr. Barrasso out of Wyoming. He's really led the charge on this. He's done a magnificent job. But they need to contact Democratic senators and say, Senator, especially we in the Mountain West here, we rely on the Bureau of Land Management. And we, especially with regard to law enforcement, the Bureau of Land Management, when you think about these law enforcement rangers, that each one of them has about 1 million acres to supervise on their own. They can't do it, so they rely on the local police, or on the county sheriffs and the county deputies. They rely on the state troopers. They all work together. And when state and local law enforcement does not have confidence in the director of the Bureau of Land Management, they're not going to be able to work together. And already the Western States Sheriff's Association has spoken out against her, saying she should not be confirmed.
Okay, last question before we take a break. Do you imagine that Senator Tester's mind is exploding right now because of all this?
Well, it absolutely is, and you know, there's a problem. There's yet another problem that I'm not fully informed on, but Senator Barrasso's made a big deal of. She got a $100,000 loan from a donor to Senator Tester when she worked for the Senate, and she did not clear that loan through the ethics officials at the Senate. I know I worked for senators, I worked for members of Congress, and I know if I'd done something like that, my boss would have called me in and said, Perry, you need to get your resume ready because you ain't here anymore. And so she's ethically flawed. That doesn't make her different than any other Biden administration official, but this is where we live. This affects us here in the West, and contact your Democrat senator and say, you got to vote no on this appointment.
Great. I've got some topics I want to talk about when we come back. This has been most interesting. We're going to take a quick break on the county seat, our only commercial today, and we'll be right back. The county seat as we know it is coming to an end. Our last television broadcast will be September 26th and 27th. Be sure to tune in. The last episodes are full of fire and information. But the county seat will continue. We are going underground. We will be talking very directly, very frankly, about the problems that affect local government and your life as a citizen of the United States of America. We will have interesting guests, in-depth dialogue, and very little commercial. Join us for County Seat Underground. You can get to it through our website, www.thecountyseat.tv, and it will be available in all kinds of streaming broadcasts. It all starts right now, the County Seat Underground. Check it out. It's over. You still here? We're done. See you underground.
Hi everyone. Have you ever wondered if the beef that we feature on AYL is as good as we say? Well, why don't you try one of our delicious sample boxes from butter-steaks.com. They are absolutely delicious and they're tender and juicy. Delivered directly from the ranch right to your door from butter-steaks.com. If you're gonna eat grass-fed beef, put the very best on your table. Yardley's Premium Beef from butter-steaks.com. You ready to eat, kids?
Yeah! I got to ramble in Beaver County, Utah, where I rode a trail under the big blue skies and didn't see anyone else. Where I cooled off in a stream, which made me and my mom and grandma laugh so hard. This is Ramblers. It's always been Utah. Ramble responsibly for future generations, like me.
Welcome back to the county seat. We're having a great conversation today with William Perry Pendley, who has served in 2 administrations in the Department of Interior, and most recently for Donald Trump as the acting or presiding administrator in the Bureau of Land Management. And we won't go into the technicalities, but thank you for explaining that to me. So we kind of got sidetracked on Stone Manning. I want to come back to where we were in the conversation, comparing the time and effort of the Trump administration and getting things done compared to Reagan. Reagan put in Jim Watt, and he got run out of town on a rail pretty quick, even though he was seeming to make some really good headway. And Trump's had a struggle keeping leadership there too, but it almost seems like Trump actually got more done at the bottom line or at the local level. What are your thoughts on that?
I think Reagan got a lot done, certainly, outside the Department of the Interior, and rebuilding confidence in the United States, and starting with the tax cuts of '82, starting a boom that lasted well through the Bill Clinton years. But he did start us on a path to energy independence. Reagan's position at the convention in 1980 was, why aren't we drilling more wells? Why does Jimmy Carter not want to drill wells to discover energy? Is he afraid we're going to find some? And indeed, we did. And what he put in place, and essentially fracking, really got a start during the Reagan administration with a couple of BLM leases that we issued at the Bureau of Land Management, Department of Interior under Ronald Reagan. And that started the fracking boom that has now gone nationwide.
Was that pretty controversial when that came up?
Oh, not at all. Fracking's been around since 1946. It was a well-known, they say, it's a controversial technology. No, not controversial at all. It's very effective, been around a long, long time. And they just found a way to use it, make it more effective in North Dakota, down in the Texas and Oklahoma, and then Missouri, the Louisiana, Arkansas, and then the Marcellus up in Pennsylvania. There was a time in the 2008, 9, 10, 12 period that 7 out of every 10 jobs in Pennsylvania was an oil and gas job, and that was fracking in the Marcellus, and that got us started with Reagan. So he started us on on our path there. Our offshore energy program and the Outer Continental Shelf really got to start with Ronald Reagan. But I think Reagan was great because he had to undo Jimmy Carter. I think Trump was greater because he had to undo Bill Clinton and Obama. And so, you have 16 years of those two really left-wing, as far as environmental policy is concerned. Clinton may have been a good old boy from Arkansas, but he did whatever the Greens told him to do, including creating monuments here in Utah. So Trump had to undo that, and I think he was very effective doing that. He picked good people who would get it done. But the thing you have to understand, you talked about Jim Watt getting run out of town. Jim wanted to stay. Ronald Reagan wanted him to stay. Ed Meese wanted him to stay. But the senators, they got cold feet on Capitol Hill, and they wouldn't support him, and he left town. And it was all because of a politically incorrect statement, and they just thought, oh gee, we can't have a person like that around talking about these kinds of things. But he brought in great people to get it done. Trump also didn't have the kind of support, I think, from the Senate that he should have had. There were a lot of things that should have gotten done, didn't get done, but we tried our best.
It seemed like both parties were dragging their feet at helping Trump out because he was such an outsider. Do you get that impression from being on the inside?
Yeah, I believe that. He truly was an outsider, and as I said, I always thought, this guy from Queens, what does he understand about the West? But he did understand. He did get it. And the thing that I came to understand about Donald Trump was he really cares about the little guy. I don't know if you've ever seen that footage of him walking out to the helicopter, and there's a Marine standing at attention there, and his lid flies off his cover. And Trump goes chasing it down. Marine's not moving, but Trump chases it down and puts it on back on his head. Who would do that? That's Donald Trump. Donald Trump cared about the little guy. And so that was our mandate when I got to the department in July of 2019. We got to help the little guy who can't afford to hire some rich lawyer hire a rich Democrat lawyer to come in and talk to Democrats, or a rich Republican lawyer to come in and talk about the Republicans as the revolving door goes in Washington. And that's why we moved the Bureau of Land Management headquarters out to Grand Junction. Because, the oil patch can always fly somebody to Washington, meet with somebody. But your county commissioners, your local sheriffs, your rancher, your off-road vehicle group, your recreational group, your county commission, they can't afford to fly to Washington every time there's a problem. They can afford to drive over to Grand Junction or catch a quick flight to Grand Junction in and out and meet with the head of the Bureau of Land Management and say, hey, you made a bad decision. And plus, putting the Bureau of Land Management here in Grand Junction, and I mean here, the Mountain West, is essentially, or just a half a day drive away, makes better decisions. Because when I was at the Bureau of Land Management in the Grand Junction, I'd hop in a government rig and I'd drive somewhere. And I'd go out in the field. In Washington, we made decisions every day based on a piece of paper, a photograph, and a map. That's no way to make a decision. You need to be on the ground. And when you have the headquarters out here, because 99.99% of the land is in the American West and Alaska.
Do you think that'll be the biggest mistake they make if they yank it back to Washington?
It'll be a terrible mistake. It'll be a terrible mistake because the people we hired, I say we hired, they were hired by the career people. These are people who bid on jobs, but they bid on jobs because, hey, I get to live in Grand Junction. I can be a range conservationist and live in Grand Junction. I can be a range conservationist and live in Cheyenne or so forth. And so we moved all those people, all those positions out here. And the people who bid on the jobs, they were just, wow, I get to be in Grand Junction. I can work, I can be 10 minutes from my job. I can have a lower cost of living. I can have a commute that's about 10 minutes instead of 90 minutes one way. And I can go out and recreate on the public lands. And so it'd be a terrible mistake, and they'll lose a ton of people. It'd be a great tragedy for, the secretary says, oh, I care about the people at BLM. Well, if you care about the people at BLM, and you care about the people who live on, must work on these lands that BLM owns, then you got to leave the headquarters here.
Got about 30 seconds for conversation left in this half hour, and I'm going to ask if you would spend another half hour with us.
Sure, be glad to.
Okay, so in 30 seconds, what's the worst thing the BLM could do in the next 4 years till we can fix the problem?
The worst thing the BLM could do, and it's doing it right now, is shut down oil and gas leasing. They have already canceled 2 sales. They're on the verge of canceling a 3rd sale. And these are sales mandated by Congress. They have to conduct them. They're not conducting. And this is the seed corn for future development of oil and gas. And we're energy independent, and we're going the wrong way.
Okay, great advice. Thank you so much
You
for
bet.
spending this half hour. If you're able, join us back in another episode for another half hour with William Perry Pendley on the county seat. We'll see you next week.